Welcome back to The Bottom Line, the channel where we audit the balance sheets of success and discover the bloody price of ambition. In the gleaming towers of the financial district, fortunes are made and lost in the blink of an eye. They call it a concrete jungle, a place where only the strong survive. But sometimes, the most dangerous predator isn't a rival corporation. It's the person sitting across from you in the boardroom. Tonight's story is about a partnership forged in ambition and dissolved in blood. It's about a rising star, a young woman who seemed to have it all, and the dark secret she was willing to kill to protect. It's a stark reminder that in the high-stakes game of money and power, a handshake can be a promise, but it can also be a prelude to a stab in the back. Before we review the final, fatal transaction, if you're the kind of person who likes to follow the money, no matter where it leads, make sure you subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss this hostile takeover. Now, the market is open. A deal is about to be closed. And the price of admission is a human life. The electronic music fades, replaced by the ambient sounds of a bustling city office ringing phones, keyboard clicks, and the low hum of conversation which slowly becomes more isolated and tense. The offices of Fraudulent Capital were a testament to the bleeding edge of 21st century ambition. Located on the 50th floor of a new, razor-sharp skyscraper, the space was a symphony of glass, chrome, and minimalist design. It was a place that smelled of new money and boundless confidence. At the heart of this thriving ecosystem were its two founding partners, a duo the financial press had dubbed the Wonder Kids of the venture capital world. Ben Carter was the public face of the firm. He was 32, effortlessly charming, with a quick smile and a network of contacts that was the envy of Wall Street. He was the salesman, the visionary, the one who could walk into a room of skeptical investors and walk out with millions in funding. He was the architect of their meteoric rise. His partner, Maya Ray, was the engine. At 29, she was a quiet, intense prodigy, a woman who spoke the language of algorithms and predictive analytics as her native tongue. While Ben wooed investors, Maya sat in her glass-walled office, her eyes fixed on a bank of monitors, identifying market trends and undervalued tech startups with an almost supernatural prescience. She was the genius, the one who turned Ben's promises into staggering profits. They were a perfect partnership, a symbiosis of charisma and intellect. On this particular Thursday, the mood at Viridian was electric. They were on the verge of closing their biggest deal yet, the acquisition of Ethereum, a revolutionary new AI-driven logistics company. It was a 9-figure deal that would catapult Fraudulent Capital into the major leagues. The final contracts were being drawn up. The celebration was already being planned. The murder happened that night. It was not a crime of passion, hidden in the shadows of a back alley. It was a cold, corporate, and brutally efficient act, executed in the sterile heart of their own office. A cleaning crew found Ben Carter the next morning. He was in his office, slumped in his expensive ergonomic chair, his head resting on his desk amidst a scattering of papers. A single, dark, crimson stain marred the pristine surface of the white oak desk. There was a small, neat puncture wound at the base of his skull, almost hidden by his thick, dark hair. The coroner would later identify the weapon as a thin, stiletto-like object, possibly an ice pick or a similar instrument, wielded with a terrifying, almost surgical precision. There were no signs of a struggle, no forced entry. Nothing was stolen. It was a clean, quiet, and deeply personal execution. The case was a political hot potato, and it landed squarely on the desk of Detective Kira Walsh. Walsh was a rising star in her own right, a sharp, intuitive detective in her late 30s who had a knack for seeing the patterns that others missed. She and her partner, a seasoned, by-the-book detective named Frank Miller, arrived at the scene to find a media circus already forming on the street below. Walsh's first impression of the crime scene was one of profound stillness. The office was a monument to success, a place of vibrant, aggressive energy. Now it was a tomb. She stood over Ben Carter's body, her gaze taking in every detail. The lack of a struggle was the first red flag. This was not a random robbery. The killer was someone Ben knew, someone he had felt comfortable enough with to turn his back on. Her first interview was with the other half of the partnership, Maya Ray. They met in a small, sterile conference room down the hall. Maya was the picture of shocked, devastated grief. She was pale, her usually intense, dark eyes red-rimmed and unfocused. She spoke in a low, trembling voice, recounting her last interaction with Ben. "We were here late last night," she whispered, her hands wrapped around a cup of untouched coffee, finalizing the Ethereum deal. "There was so much paperwork. I left around 9 p.m. He said he was going to stay for another hour to review the final contracts. He was so happy, so excited." Her voice broke, and she buried her face in her hands. She was a convincing, sympathetic witness. Frank Miller, a man who tended to see the world in black and white, bought her performance completely. A brilliant young woman, her partner and friend brutally murdered on the eve of their greatest triumph. It was a tragedy, but Walsh was a student of nuance. She noticed things. She noticed that while Maya's hands were trembling, her eyes, when she thought no one was looking, were sharp and analytical, scanning the room, assessing the situation. She noticed that her grief, while seemingly profound, was a little too perfect, a little too much like a scene from a movie. And she noticed a small, almost invisible scratch on the back of Maya's right hand, near the knuckles. "How did you get that?" Walsh asked, her tone casual. Maya glanced at her hand, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. "Oh, I don't know. My cat, probably. She's always scratching me." It was a plausible, throwaway answer, but it was a detail that Walsh filed away. The initial investigation focused on the usual suspects in a high-finance murder: jilted investors, rival firms, disgruntled former employees. The Ethereum deal was a goldmine, and Ben Carter was a man who had made his share of enemies on his way to the top. The list of potential suspects was a who's who of the city's financial elite. But as the days turned into a week, every lead turned into a dead end. Every alibi checked out. The world of venture capital was cutthroat, but it was not, as a rule, homicidal. The investigation was stalling. Walsh, frustrated, decided to pivot. She couldn't find an external enemy, so she started to look for an internal one. She and Miller began a deep, forensic dive into the company itself, into the relationship between the two wonder kids. They subpoenaed years of company emails, internal memos, financial records, and the personal communications of both Ben Carter and Maya Ray. They spent days sifting through a mountain of data, building a picture of the partnership. On the surface, it was a model of collaborative success. Ben was the rainmaker, Maya was the analyst. He brought in the money, she made it grow. But as they dug deeper, Walsh began to see a subtle underlying pattern. In the early days of the firm, the emails between them were filled with a shared excitement, a collaborative we landed the deal. We should invest in this. But over the past year, the language had shifted. Ben's emails were still filled with we, but Maya's had become increasingly dominated by I. "I found this opportunity. My algorithm predicts." It was a subtle, almost perceptible shift, but it spoke of a growing divergence, a quiet struggle for credit and control. The real breakthrough came from a series of deleted emails they recovered from Ben Carter's hard drive. They were from the week before his murder. They were drafts, emails he had written but had never sent. They were all addressed to Maya. The first one was conciliatory. "Maya, we need to talk. I know you've been feeling undervalued. I want to make this right. Let's restructure the partnership agreement to reflect your contributions." The second one was more frustrated. "Why won't you talk to me about this? We built this company together. Don't shut me out." The final one, written the day before his death, was a bombshell. It was a draft of a formal legal notice. "Maya, I have been reviewing the due diligence reports for the Ethereum acquisition. I have discovered a series of significant financial irregularities and misrepresentations in your initial analysis. It appears that key data regarding their liabilities was deliberately omitted from the investment prospectus you prepared. This constitutes fraud. We are legally obligated to disclose this to our investors immediately and terminate the deal. We need to meet and discuss this at once. This is not a request." Walsh stared at the screen, a cold, clear understanding dawning in her mind. This wasn't a partnership. It was a powder keg. She cooked the books, Miller said, his voice a low whistle. She faked the numbers on the biggest deal of their lives to make it look better than it was. And Ben found out, Walsh added, the pieces clicking into place. He was going to blow the whistle. He was going to kill the deal to protect the firm, to protect his investors. And in doing so, he was going to expose her as a fraud and destroy her career. This was the motive. It wasn't about a simple disagreement. It was about self-preservation. Maya Ray, the quiet, intense genius, had built her reputation, her entire identity, on the foundation of her infallible analytical skills. To be exposed as a fraud would be a fate worse than death. They now had a powerful motive, but they still had no physical evidence. The crime scene was clean. There was no murder weapon. Maya had a plausible alibi for the time after 9 p.m. They needed a way to connect her, physically, to the crime. Walsh's mind went back to the small, insignificant detail she had noticed in her first interview. The scratch on Maya's hand. A cat's scratch is one-directional, she mused to Miller. But a scratch from a struggle, from a fingernail, often has microscopic traces of the other person's skin or blood under your own nail. Ben Carter didn't have a chance to fight back. But what if he had one single reflexive moment? What if he reached up, instinctively, as he was being attacked from behind? It was a long shot, but it was the only one they had. They got a warrant to take a scraping from under Maya Ray's fingernails. The preliminary lab results came back a day later. Under the nails of her right hand, they found microscopic traces of human tissue. The lab needed a DNA sample from the victim to confirm a match. It was a formality, but it was the final, critical link. As they waited for the final DNA report, Walsh felt a quiet, grim certainty. She knew who the killer was. She was no longer just investigating a murder. She was unwrapping a complex, multi-million-dollar fraud. A scheme of ambition so intense that it had culminated in a cold, calculated execution. Maya Ray hadn't just killed her partner. She had killed the one person who had discovered her secret, the one person who could have brought her entire, glittering world crashing down. The discovery of the fraudulent deal was like a key turning in a complex lock. The entire case, which had seemed like a maze of dead ends, now had a clear, straight path leading directly to Maya Ray. But Detective Walsh knew that motive, however powerful, was not enough. In a court of law, a smart lawyer could paint Ben's unsent email as a simple business dispute, a misunderstanding between partners. The DNA evidence from under Maya's fingernails was compelling, but it was microscopic, circumstantial. A defense attorney could argue it was from a casual, incidental contact. Walsh needed more. She needed to build an ironclad, irrefutable case. She needed to prove not just that Maya had a reason to kill Ben, but that she had the means, the opportunity, and the specific, cold-blooded temperament to carry it out. Her investigation split into two parallel tracks. The first was to deconstruct the Ethereum deal, to prove, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the fraud was real, deliberate, and Maya's sole creation. The second was to tear down Maya's alibi and reconstruct the final, fatal hour in Ben Carter's office. For the financial investigation, Walsh brought in a forensic accountant from the DA's office, a quiet, bespectacled man named Elias Vance who had a genius for finding the lies hidden in spreadsheets. Together, they descended into the digital labyrinth of the Ethereum deal. 4 days, they lived in a world of financial projections, liability statements, and due diligence reports. Vance confirmed what Ben's email had suggested. The numbers didn't just add up. They had been masterfully manipulated. It's a work of art, in a sociopathic kind of way, Vance remarked, his eyes gleaming with professional admiration as he pointed to a complex algorithm on his screen. This is the core of it, he explained to Walsh. Ethereum's business model is based on a predictive logistics algorithm. It's their crown jewel. But they have a huge weakness: their debt structure. They're massively overleveraged with a series of high-interest short-term loans that are about to come due. In a normal analysis, this would be a giant red flag. It would significantly devalue the company. He pulled up another screen. This is Maya's prospectus. Look, She created a secondary algorithm, a risk mitigation model, that supposedly hedges against the debt. But it's pure fiction. It's based on a set of idealized, best-case scenario market conditions that have a near-zero probability of ever occurring. She essentially created a mathematical fantasy to hide a very real, very ugly balance sheet. She didn't just omit the liabilities. She built an elegant, complex lie to make them disappear. Ben, with his business acumen, must have eventually seen that the underlying assumptions were impossible. The fraud was real. Now Walsh had to prove it was Maya's alone. She and Miller began a series of quiet, careful interviews with the junior analysts and data scientists at Viridian Capital, the people who had worked under Maya on the Ethereum project. At first, they met a wall of loyalty and fear. Maya Ray was a revered, almost mythical figure in the office. But Walsh was an expert at finding the cracks. She found a young, ambitious analyst who had been quietly pushed off the Ethereum project a month before the deal was finalized. "I raised some concerns," the analyst admitted, his voice low and nervous, "about the debt modeling. It just didn't seem right. The numbers were too good to be true. I brought it up with Maya. She was cold. She told me my analysis was flawed, that I didn't understand the synergistic complexities. The next day, I was reassigned to another project. She took over the final modeling herself, working on it alone, after hours on her private server. This was the smoking gun. Maya had not only created the fraudulent model, but she had also actively silenced dissent and isolated the final stages of the work to ensure no one else could discover her deception. With the financial case solidifying, Walsh turned her attention to the night of the murder. Maya's alibi was simple and seemingly strong. She claimed she had left the office at 9 p.m., gone straight home to her high-security apartment building, and had not left until the next morning. The security logs from her building's keycard system confirmed her entry at 9:28 p.m. and showed no further exits or entries for her apartment until the next morning. "The alibi is solid," Miller said, frustrated. "The timestamps don't lie." "Human beings lie," Walsh retorted. "The timestamps just tell us when her keycard was used. They don't tell us who was holding it." Walsh pulled the security camera footage from Maya's apartment building. It was a high-end luxury tower, with cameras covering every entrance, elevator, and hallway. She and Miller spent an entire day watching the footage from the night of the murder. At 9:28 p.m., there was Maya, walking through the lobby, looking exhausted, carrying a briefcase. She got into the elevator and went up to her floor. So far, her story held. But Walsh kept watching. She fast-forwarded through hours of footage, watching the comings and goings of the building's wealthy residents. Then, at 9:55 p.m., she saw something that made her stop and rewind. A woman emerged from the service elevator in the parking garage. She was dressed in a dark, anonymous tracksuit, her hair tucked into a baseball cap, her face obscured by large sunglasses, even though it was night. She walked with a quick, purposeful stride, got into a nondescript sedan, and drove away. "Who's that?" Miller asked. "I don't know," Walsh said, leaning closer to the screen. "But she came from the service elevator, which means she's a resident or staff, and she's trying very hard not to be seen." On a hunch, Walsh pulled the building's resident directory and began cross-referencing the car's license plate. It was a rental leased to a shell corporation. Another dead end. But Walsh's mind was working. The service elevator. It's a blind spot. There's a camera in the garage, but not inside the elevator itself. Where does it go? They got the building schematics. The service elevator had access to all floors, but it opened into the service corridors, behind the main residential hallways. It was a route designed for maintenance staff and deliveries, a way to move through the building unseen. The final piece came from a deep dive into Maya's personal life, a part of the investigation they had initially overlooked. She had no real social life, no hobbies outside of work. But they found one recurring personal expense: weekly payments to a home cleaning service. Walsh interviewed the cleaner, a young immigrant woman named Rosa. Rosa was terrified, but Walsh, with the help of a translator, was able to reassure her. "We're not interested in you, Rosa. We just need to know about your work for Ms. Ray. She is a very particular woman, Rosa said, her hands twisting in her lap. Very clean, but very cold. A few weeks ago, she asked me for a favor. A strange favor. She said she was having a security issue and needed a copy of my building access keycard, just for a few days. She paid me $500. It was more than a week's salary. I needed the money for my family. I gave it to her. The entire timeline of the murder night snapped into brutal crystal clarity. Maya had gone home at 9 p.m., making sure she was seen on the lobby cameras, creating her alibi. She had then changed into a disguise, taken the service elevator route she knew would be a blind spot down to the garage, and driven back to the office in a rental car she had leased under a fake name. She would have arrived back at the Viridian Capitol building around 10:15 p.m. Ben would have still been there working. As his partner, her presence wouldn't have been unusual. She would have entered his office, perhaps under the pretense of wanting to talk, to apologize. He would have trusted her. He would have turned his back, and she would have killed him. She would have then returned to her apartment, again using the service elevator, leaving no trace of her exit or re-entry in the main security logs. The only thing she couldn't account for was the reflexive, desperate scratch from her dying partner. The final confirmation came from the lab. The DNA from the tissue found under Maya Ray's fingernails was a perfect match to Ben Carter. Walsh now had the complete picture. The deep-seated motive of the fraud, the meticulous, calculated shattering of her own alibi, and the final, damning piece of physical evidence. She had followed the paper trail of the fraudulent deal right to the heart of the crime, and now it was time to close the account. With the forensic confirmation of Ben's DNA under Maya's fingernails, Detective Walsh's case was no longer a theory. It was a narrative, written in blood and spreadsheets. She now had every element she needed. Motive, means, and opportunity. All that remained was the final confrontation. Walsh knew that a standard, by-the-book arrest at Maya's home or office would be a mistake. Maya was a creature of control, a woman who lived in a world of calculated variables. To cede control of the final scene to her would be a tactical error. Walsh decided to bring her back to the one place where her carefully constructed world had completely shattered: the police precinct. She sent a uniformed officer to Maya's office with a formal request for a follow-up interview regarding the ongoing investigation, a deliberately neutral summons designed to prevent her from lawyering up immediately. Maya arrived looking cool and composed, dressed in a sharp, dark business suit, the very picture of a cooperating witness. She walked into the same small, sterile conference room where she had first given her statement, but this time the atmosphere was different. There were no cups of coffee, no expressions of sympathy. There was only Walsh, her partner Miller, and a thick, heavy file on the table between them. "Thank you for coming in again, Ms. Ray," Walsh began, her voice flat and official. "We have a few more questions about the Ethereum deal." Maya's expression didn't change, but Walsh saw a subtle tightening around her eyes. "I've told you everything I know, Detective. It was the deal Ben and I had been working towards our entire careers." "We know," Walsh said, opening the file. "We've been working on it, too, with a forensic accountant, a man named Elias Vance. He's very good. He was particularly impressed with your risk mitigation algorithm. He called it a mathematical fantasy, a brilliant, complex lie designed to hide Ethereum's massive, toxic debt." She slid the forensic accountant's report across the table. Maya glanced at the cover but didn't open it. "We also spoke to one of your former analysts," Walsh continued, her voice relentless, building the case piece by piece. "The one you reassigned after he questioned your numbers. He told us how you took over the final modeling yourself, working in secret, ensuring no one else could see the beautiful lie you were constructing." "My analysts are junior staff," Maya said, her voice like ice. "They don't always see the big picture. I make the final calls. That's my job." "And was it also part of your job to silence your partner when he discovered the truth?" Walsh countered, her voice sharp. She slid a printed copy of Ben's final, unsent email onto the table, placing it directly on top of the accountant's report. "He found out, didn't he, Maya?" He found your mathematical fantasy, and he was going to do the right thing. He was going to kill the deal and expose the fraud. He was going to destroy you. For the first time, a genuine crack appeared in Maya's icy composure. Her gaze was fixed on the email, on Ben's final, desperate words. "Let's talk about the night he died," Walsh said, pressing her advantage. "You told us you went home at 9 p.m., and you did. We saw you on the lobby cameras. Perfect alibi. But we also saw you leave, 25 minutes later, from the service elevator in the parking garage, dressed in a tracksuit and sunglasses. You came back to the office, didn't you?" She laid a series of still frames from the security footage on the table, a storyboard of Maya's deception. "We spoke to your cleaning lady, Rosa," Walsh added, the words a series of hammer blows. "She was very helpful. She told us all about how you borrowed her keycard. A clever way to move through the building without leaving a digital trace. Very smart. Very meticulous." Maya was silent, her face a pale, blank mask. She was processing, calculating, searching for an escape route where there was none. "You went back to Ben's office," Walsh said, her voice dropping, painting the final brutal scene. "He trusted you. He turned his back on you. And you killed him. You took something sharp. We believe it was the custom letter opener he kept on his desk, the one that's now conveniently missing, and you stabbed him once at the base of the skull. Clean, quiet, efficient move. An analyst's solution to a messy human problem." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "You almost got away with it. You were so careful. But you forgot one thing. You forgot that even a man who doesn't see it coming has reflexes. He reached for you. He didn't have time to fight, but he had time to leave a mark. On you." Walsh slid the final document across the table. It was the DNA lab report. She tapped a single highlighted line. "The skin cells found under your fingernails are a 100% match to Ben Carter." The finality of the words seemed to suck the air out of the room. Maya stared at the report, her mind, which could process 1,000,000 data points in a second, now frozen by this one simple biological fact. Her composure did not break in a storm of tears or a fit of rage. It simply evaporated. The mask was gone, and what was left was not a monster, but something far more chilling. A machine that had been found to have a flaw in its programming. "He was going to undo it," she said, her voice a flat, emotionless monotone. "All of it. Years of work. The perfect deal. He was going to destroy it all for a principle. For ethics. It was an irrational variable. He was emotional, sentimental. He saw the investors as people. I saw them as data points on a risk-reward spectrum. His sentimentality was a liability to the firm, a threat to our success. It was a confession, but it was devoid of all remorse." She spoke of her partner's murder as if it were a hostile takeover of a failing asset, a necessary, logical step to protect her own interests. She had performed a cost-benefit analysis and decided that Ben Carter's life was an acceptable loss. "So you terminated the liability?" Walsh said, her voice filled with a cold disgust. "I corrected the variable," Maya replied, her dark, analytical eyes meeting Walsh's for the first time, without a flicker of human feeling. The arrest was a quiet affair. As they led her away in handcuffs, she showed no emotion, her face a blank slate. She was a genius who had been outsmarted, a planner whose perfect crime had been undone by a single, unpredictable human reflex. In the aftermath, Viridian Capital collapsed under the weight of the scandal. The fraudulent Ethereum deal was exposed, sending shockwaves through the financial community. The gleaming offices on the 50th floor were emptied out, the names scrubbed from the lobby directory. Months later, Walsh stood at the window of her own office, looking out at the city's glittering, indifferent skyline. She thought of Maya Ray, a woman of immense, powerful intellect, who would now spend the rest of her life in a system she could neither analyze nor control. She had seen ambition curdle into greed, and greed curdle into a cold, transactional view of human life. The case was closed, the account settled. The bottom line was simple. In the end, no amount of profit could ever justify the cost.